Today, we're diving into a really massive strategic shift for one of crypto's biggest players, Cardano. For years it's been seen as this technical powerhouse, but one that felt like it was kind of stuck on its own island. Well, that is all about to change. So that brings us to the big question, right? How does a blockchain that was built in isolation suddenly transform into the connective tissue for the entire crypto economy? The answer, it turns out, is in a super clever two-part play that solves not just its own problems, but a huge problem facing the entire industry. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk about Cardano's island problem. Then we'll get into the two-part solution, Layer 0 as the connectivity bridge and Midnight as the privacy shield. After that, we'll see how they combine into this awesome toll booth strategy, and finally, we'll take a look at the road ahead. All right, so let's kick things off with Cardano's two main challenges, its own isolation and the industry's much bigger struggle with privacy. For the longest time, the biggest knock on Cardano has been that it's a walled garden. A technically brilliant one for sure, but it was cut off from all the action and all the money that was flowing through ecosystems like Ethereum and Solana. To really thrive, Cardano had to build some bridges off that island. At the exact same time, the whole crypto space was stuck in this privacy paradox. On one side, you have public blockchains like Ethereum, which are totally transparent. That's a complete non-starter for any serious business that needs to protect its data. But on the other side, you've got pure privacy coins, which are so opaque that they've become a huge target for regulators. A middle ground was desperately needed. And that brings us to the solution, a pair of announcements that just completely flipped the scripts on the whole Cardano narrative. So at Consensus Hong Kong in February 2026, Charles Hoskinson dropped a double bombshell. First, a formal deal to integrate Layer 0, which is basically the universal connector for blockchains. And second, a firm launch date for Midnight, its long-awaited privacy network. Now, these weren't just updates. They were the two halves of a single, incredibly powerful new strategy. Let's dig into that first piece of the puzzle, Layer 0. Think of it as the superhighway being built right off the Cardano island. So what exactly is Layer 0? Well, you can think of it like a universal translator for blockchains. It's a messaging protocol that lets different chains talk to each other directly without needing some risky, centralized middleman. It's the key to unlocking a true multi-chain world. And the scale here is, well, it's just massive. We're not talking about connecting to one or two other chains. Layer 0 plugs Cardano directly into over 160 different blockchain ecosystems. And yeah, we're talking about the heavyweights, Ethereum, Solana, Base, basically the entire decentralized economy. And you know what connecting to those chains means? It means connecting to their money. The Layer 0 protocol opens the door for Cardano to tap into over $80 billion in assets across all those chains. All of a sudden, the island isn't isolated anymore. It's a major port city with access to global trade routes. So, how do these connections stay secure? Well, it all comes down to a really cool piece of tech called the Omnichain Fungible Token Standard, or OFT. Instead of creating those kind of risky wrapped assets you hear about, the OFT standard uses a burn and mint system. A token is destroyed on one chain, and an identical one is instantly created on another. This keeps the total supply exactly the same and makes the whole system much more secure. Now for the second half of this 1-2 punch, Midnight, the privacy shield that's built from the ground up for a regulated world. Midnight introduces this concept called rational privacy. It's the answer to that paradox we talked about earlier. Using some really advanced math called zero-knowledge proofs, you can prove something is true, like say, I am over 18 or this transaction followed the rules, without actually revealing any of the sensitive data itself. It's privacy by default, with the option for selective disclosure when you need it for compliance. The economic engine driving Midnight is really unique. It uses a two-token model. You hold a token called NIGH, which is transparent and used for governance. Just by holding it, you automatically generate another resource called Dust. Dust is private, you can't trade it, and you spend it to pay for your private transactions. And since Dust just regenerates over time, it gives businesses predictable costs that aren't tied to wild market swings. It's a brilliant setup. Okay, so we've got connectivity and we've got privacy. But the real genius here is how they fit together into what the community started calling the toll booth strategy. You know, this quote from a Reddit user just absolutely nails it. Cardano/Midnight just became the privacy tax collectors for all of crypto. Think about that. The idea is that they don't have to compete head-to-head with Ethereum or Solana anymore. They just need to provide a service that everyone needs, compliant privacy, and take a tiny cut from every transaction that uses it, no matter what chain it's on. So here's a quick look at how all the pieces work together. You've got layer 0 as the messaging layer, connecting everything. You have Midnight as the execution layer that protects all the data. There's a new compliant stablecoin, USDCX, that becomes the main asset moving through these private channels. And it's all anchored to the rock-solid security of the main Cardano blockchain, which acts as the final settlement layer. Honestly, the best way to think about this whole thing is the AWS for privacy analogy. You know how Amazon Web Services provides the cloud infrastructure for tons of companies, including their own competitors? Well, Midnight aims to do the exact same thing, but for privacy. It's not trying to replace other blockchains, it's offering them an essential service they can't build themselves and capturing a little piece of the value from the entire ecosystem. So what's next? I mean, this isn't all just going to happen overnight. There's a very clear multi-phase plan to roll this all out and get to full decentralization. The roadmap is broken into 4 distinct phases. It kicked off with the token launch in late 2025. Right about now, we're seeing the mainnet launch with the very first dApps. The next step is bringing in Cardano's stake pool operators to start decentralizing the network. And then the final phase, which is targeted for the third quarter of 2026, aims for full decentralization and unlocking that cross-chain privacy for everyone. Which leaves us with one final big question. By solving both the isolation problem and the privacy paradox at the same time, is Cardano about to kick off a whole new era for a financial system that is compliant, private, and completely interconnected? The infrastructure as we speak is being built.